So the sugya of bרכת לישב, when do we make a bracha on the sukkah? It's a sugya that you really can't be machmir. You can't just say, a lot of times you have a shaila, I'll just be machmir. Over here, what's the chumrah? You had to make the bracha, not to make the bracha. If he does make the bracha and he's not supposed to make the bracha, chalila, it's a bracha vatala. If he doesn't make a bracha and he was supposed to make a bracha, so then eating in a sukkah without a bracha, doing a mitzvah without a bracha, is a dreadful crime. There's a marshal in Siman Tzadik Ches. He talks about a shaila which is also somewhat time related to our sugya, which is what happens on Shmini Atzeres. We know that on Shmini Atzeres we don't make a bracha. Some people don't even eat in the sukkah. Okay, but in the Gemara, you eat in the sukkah without a bracha. So the marshal is clearing why on Shmini Atzeres don't we find people making an early yontif, like we make an early yontif sometimes. So why don't we make an early Shmini Atzeres? So marshal says, don't make an early Shmini Atzeres. So there, why? He says, because now you're going to have a tremendous problem what to do about the Leishiv. What's the problem about the Leishiv? Now, a lot has been discussed about this with the Hilchos Taisus Shabbos and whatnot. What's the problem of the marshal, Ligabi the bracha of the Leishiv? He says, well, we know that on Shmini Atzeres, we don't make a bracha. So now, in essence, when you go into the sukkah, it's still really technically sukkahs. Elamai, you made it yontif. So if it's yontif, you're going to have to sit in the sukkah without a bracha. And if it's really the sukkahs, it's still part of the Chol Hamoed, it's still part of sukkahs. So then you have to make a bracha if you go into the sukkah. So the marshal says, okay, so what's the big deal? Go into the sukkah, it's a suffix, and suffix bracha is lahakel, and you won't make a bracha. He says that would be a tragedy. So the marshal, his words are peladik. He says that would be moyel me'HaKadosh Baruch Hu avin gadol v'goizel bracha. You'd be stealing from the Heilig of Hashefer his bracha. What are you stealing? If you're stealing from Hashem the bracha, you're stealing the bracha from us. There's a Mishabura. The Mishabura in Siman Tav, in Siman Shin Chav Gimel. Mishabura is discussing over there the halachas of Tfilas Kelim. He discusses if you could, with harama, be toivel a kli on Shabbos, you can make it look like you want to drink. And you could go and take a cup that needs to be toiveled and put in the mikvah. The Mishabura warns, he says, don't do it. So the Mishabura, why not to do it? So the Mishabura, because if you do it, you're not going to be able to make a bracha. Because then it'll be nicker that you're doing it. So you won't be able to make a bracha. No, what's the big deal to not do it a bracha? Because to do a mitzvah without a bracha is terrible. So Mamela, our sugya becomes very serious. We can't just say, well, be machmir, make a bracha, be machmir, don't make a bracha, at least we'll get the mitzvah. To not make a bracha would be a tragedy if you're supposed to make a bracha. So this is a sugya Abayisai that we have to try to get clear. When do we make a bracha on the sukkah? When do we not make a bracha on the sukkah? And it is, haka, not such a clear sugya. Let me just turn my AC on, because we're going to need a lot of AC for this shir Abayisai. You're going to schwitz on this one. So, it's not the easy sugya. I'll try, but I can, Bez Hashem, to make it a little bit easier, to see what exactly is halacha l'maisa and how we got there to the halacha l'maisa, when you make a bracha on the sukkah, when you don't make a bracha on the sukkah. So we know there's different types of mitzvahs. There's birchas Torah, that you make a bracha basically once a day. It's a rare occasion that a person would make it twice in a day. This whole shaila is about staying up overnight and whatnot. Then but that's once a day. That's the basic psaka, I think, of most people. Of everyone, you make a bracha, birchas Torah once a day. When it comes to, for example, lulav, you make a bracha every day. You don't make one bracha for 7 days, you make a bracha every day. When it comes to tefillin, we make a bracha every time we put on the tefillin. If you take off the tefillin and a person goes to the bathroom, certainly if you he would have to make another bracha. That's if he takes off his tefillin and he decides he wants to put them back on to learn morning seder or something, you put on a tefillin, you make another bracha. People always ask me a shaila. He found out that his tefillin are puzzle or whatever, or the shaila, and then he wants to know, he now has put it back on his tefillin. Does he have to go and make a bracha? The answer is, anyways, you'd have to make another bracha because you're Mesiach Das. So tefillin, every time you put on tefillin, you make a new bracha. So it seems to be that there are some things that are clear. What's the halacha of sukkah? So Gemara Sukkah Daf Mem Hey. Ask this shaila. The Gemara says echad zeh ve'echad zeh. That's the big line here. Bein lulav and bein sukkah. The Gemara says echad zeh ve'echad zeh. You have to be mevarich all shiva, all 7 days. So it seems to be quite simple. We make a bracha every day of Sukkot. So simple reading is like lulav. Lulav means every day you make a bracha one time on the lulav. I guess every day you make one bracha on the sukkah. Comes again Taisus over here. Taisus in bracha is a bit more elaborate, but Taisus over here in Daf Mem Hey, Taisus speaks out that sukkah is different than lulav. By lulav, you make a bracha when you take it once a day. You don't make a bracha more than once a day. But by sukkah, it doesn't say, and by lulav it says ulakachtem lachem. You do the ma'aseh lakicha, you make a bracha. But by sukkah, says Taisus, it says v'sukkahs teishvu. And since every single time you sit in the sukkah, Zok Taisus, you get a mitzvah. The Taisus says a tremendous chiddush over here. He says that by a sukkah, you make the bracha every time you come in and you get a mitzvah. Every time you're coming in and getting a mitzvah, then you go and you make a bracha. If you left the sukkah, you were Mesiach Das from the sukkah, you went out, you went on a tiyul, you did something, and then you come back to the sukkah, you have to make a new bracha. Eifrek Taisus here, and Taisus in brachas Daf Yud Aleph, Taisus says a tremendous insight. You say that all the mashkichim tell us, Rabbi say. Taisus says, by Birchas HaTorah we find not like that. There's by tefillin, that's what we find. By tefillin, you make a bracha every time you put on the tefillin. If you have a HSukkah das, you make a new bracha on the tefillin. Sukkah seems to be the same. Maishna, when it comes to Birchas HaTorah, says Taisus, by Birchas HaTorah, technically you're right. If you would have a HSukkah das from Birchas HaTorah, then in a Chanami, you'd have to make another Birchas HaTorah. But says Taisus, who's Mesiach Das from Torah? A Yid that goes to work all day, he's not Mesiach Das. He gets a second, he learns, he listens to a shir, something. There's a good shaila all day long. Everything he's doing in business, he has to declare it's halachically mutter, not halachically mutter. So you're never Mesiach Das from Torah Kadesha. It's a heartwarming statement from Taisus. But Al Kapanim and our Taisus state that here there's a bracha every time you come into the sukkah. And it sounds like, and that's really the lashon of some of the Rishonim, even if you come in 100 times a day, you make 100 brachas. So long as you're Mesiach Das, you'd make a bracha. If that's the case, our job is easy. A person wants to know, what's the din? It's very simple. You go into the sukkah, you make a bracha. You left the sukkah and you were Mesiach Das from the sukkah. When you come back, you make another bracha. Something like tefillin. It would basically be the same halacha as tefillin. Maishna from lulav l'kachtem lachem once a day. And that would be quite simple. Does the shita seemingly of Taisus? And ad kedei kach, what would be a person, the Mishabur brings down, the Chayodam, let's say there was a person in the word tzadikim that was Zaycha, that he sits 7 days in his sukkah and he never leaves his sukkah. Sleeps in his sukkah, he has minyanim in his sukkah, he learns in his sukkah, he never leaves his sukkah. He'll go to the bathroom, but that's not a HaSukkah das. So he would make one bracha for all 7 days. And there were tzaddikim that did that because he was never Mesiach Das. But Taisus is telling us that every time you go into the sukkah and every time you get a mitzvah, so then you're getting the mitzvah, Teishu Kein Taduru, and there's a state. And what's the pshat? That the chiddush of Taisus, l'chayra, is not that you're getting a mitzvah every time you go into the sukkah. That l'chayra is Gemara Mefereshes. That's our Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch says, Keitzad, the mitzvah, sukkah. Taisus, the Gemara really, right? Keitzad mitzvah yeshiva sukkah, oichel shoyse, darba sukkah, shivas yamin, that's a mitzvah. Bein b'yoyim, bein b'layla, the way you live, Teishu Kein Taduru. Every time I go in there, I get a mitzvah. So the mitzvah is not just eating. The mitzvah is being in the sukkah. And then the mitzvah is being there, holds Taisus. So therefore, every single time, it's a bezundra mitzvah, it's a bezundra bracha. In other words, it seems to be that the chiddush of Taisus is not that when you go into the sukkah, you get a mitzvah. That part is pasha. The chiddush of Taisus is that whenever I go in, so then each time is a new mitzvah. So therefore, each mitzvah requires a new bracha. And the Maggid Mishnah brings from the Goinim, even if a person goes in 100 times, he's chayiv a bracha each and every time. So long as there's no HaSukkah das, as long as there was HaSukkah das. If there was HaSukkah das, every time you go into the sukkah, you make another bracha. This is the shita also seemingly of the Vilna Gaon. The Meister Rav brings down from the Vilna Gaon. This is the way the Rif held. This is the way the Rambam held. And it seems to be this absolutely the shita of Roy Rishonim, Rabbi Isai. It's not Roy Poiskin, but Roy Rishonim. If this is true, the shir is over. Now you know what to do. And the real, I guess they call them die-hard Gra Talmidim in Yerushalayim, Mir HaKodesh, The real diehard grow Talmidim Yerushalayim or Kodesh, they do like this. They go into the sukkah, whether they eat, whether they sleep, they'll make a bracha. As long as it was as a chadas, let's say he went out and he went to Davin or whatnot. He went to a different family or something. He comes back to his sukkah. He makes a new bracha. That's a shita of the Goinim. That's a shita of the Rambam, the Rif, and the Vilna Gaon. Tosfos in Brachas Daf Yud Aleph Beis says that the minig, and it seems to be many Rishonim quote this minig. The minig is only when it comes to eating. Now, this is very, very difficult to understand, especially Kafi, what we spoke about in the previous year.
Back.
Come again?
I'm telling you to put the prices back. Yeah.
Thank you. It would seem to be that based on what we saw in previous year, this is clearly very difficult. Tosfos in Brachas says on Daf Yud Aleph on the base that the minig seems to be that the only time that they would make a bracha was when they would eat in the sukkah, and not when they would sleep in the sukkah. A very difficult minig, because I understand that we'll see in a minute. Perhaps the other things are not as mechuyev. You know, there's no ister to eat outside, to learn outside of sukkah, and there's no ister to sit outside of sukkah, but there certainly is an ister to eat outside of sukkah, but there's also an ister to sleep outside of sukkah. So what is this minig? This very interesting minig over here that Tosfos brings down. It seems to be as a widespread minig, so says the Shulchan Aruch, that people only made a bracha on eating in the sukkah and not on sleeping in the sukkah or anything else. But Tosfos elaborates a little bit. And the truth is, everybody side, like we said, sleeping is the ikar chiyuv in a sukkah. Sleeping is even in a situation where it's a rai. Eating, you can eat a rai outside the sukkah, but sleeping, you can't even do a rai outside the sukkah. So Mamela becomes very shver. It's a very, very difficult minig. We heard till now the Goinim said, anytime you go into the sukkah, you make a bracha. Okay. That why? Because each time you go in, you get a mitzvah kiyumis. Let's say I go in and I learn, I'm getting a mitzvah. Maybe I'm not mechuyev to learn in here, but I'm certainly getting a mitzvah. So you make a bracha. We make mitzvahs kiyumis. We make bracha on tzitzis and talis. We know what a mitzvah kiyumis is. We make brachas on a shchita, on a mitzvah kiyumis. So why we make a bracha according to the Goinim, and the Goin is very clear. Comes again, Tais. He says no. You only make a bracha on eating in the sukkah. Okay, I hear that you don't want to make a bracha maybe on learning in the sukkah or on, let's say, just hanging out in the sukkah because it's a kiyumis. Maybe even that's difficult. But sleeping is a bigger chiyuv than eating in the sukkah. So what's the pshat in the Tosfos? So Tosfos elaborates a bit. Tosfos says that it's a mistake. It's not the pshat that you don't make a bracha on the other things, the way that we somewhat portrayed it, that you're just making a bracha on eating. That's absolutely incorrect. And also, it has not changed according to Tosfos. Avada, everything's a mitzvah. You go in, you hang out in the sukkah, you go in, you go into the sukkah and you listen to a shir in the sukkah, daven and Tehillim, who knows, whatever you do in the sukkah. Hang out. It's for sure a mitzvah. And sleeping, vadai is a mitzvah. Why aren't you making a bracha? I am. How am I making a bracha? You make a bracha on the eating, and it's a poiter, the ikr, which is the eating in the sukkah. Pat is the tafel, which is everything else. This is also very difficult to understand, but at least we're getting somewhere. Tosfos is not saying that there's no bracha on the other food, on the other activities. About all the mitzvahs, everything you're doing in the sukkah is a mitzvah. They were only misakin the bracha on the ikr, which is eating for some reason, and then that bracha that you make on the eating is going to pater all the other things you do in a sukkah. Now, there's a two-part chiddush in this Tosfos, and the Rosh elaborates. Number one is that, like we said, why eating is the ikr and sleeping is not the ikr, that we have to explain. But that's number one. And number two, derech agav, that when I make that bracha on the ikr, it patters the tafel. Okay, that's also somewhat of a chiddush. Somehow sleeping in a sukkah is tafel, and somehow learning in a sukkah is tafel to eating. Okay, you're making one bracha, and it's going on all of that. That's the first chiddush in Tosfos. But there's another chiddush in Tosfos. This is phenomenal. It says Tosfos, because I read there's a minig that what all you do is make a bracha only when you eat. Now, I eat. I go out for 3 hours, and then I come back, and I go and I sleep, or I go and I do something else, or I go and I learn. So how could you say now that the ikar pat is the tafel? I understand that the bracha is on the ikar, which is the eating, and I understand that pat is the tafel, which is the learning or the sleeping or something. But here you can't say it's tafel because there's a HSukkah das. So then now what are you going to do? So that's the second aspect that the Rosh points out over here, according to Tosfos, that for some reason we don't say HSukkah das. That's a little bit of a more difficult chiddush, but that if you left the sukkah and you come back to sleep, you're still covered because the bracha on the ikar kfiyas was on the achila, and somehow that works for everything else. Very big chiddush, as they state in Tosfos. So again, just to make clear, there is no shaila that you're getting a mitzvah when you're going in and hanging out in the sukkah and sleeping in the sukkah. That's no question. The only question is that how does it work? Do I need a bracha on everything else? And that is Mechadish Tosfos, that we only make a bracha on the ikar and the pat is the tafel. And on that, Tosfos is Mechadish Vaita, the Rosh is Mechadish it even more, that not only does the ikar pat is the tafel when it's, first I eat and then I learn. Says the Rosh, even if you first learn and then you eat, the bracha on the ikar, that's going to go on anything you do today. Like they said, make a bracha only on the ikar type of hanhaga in the sukkah. Now this Abayisai needs a little bit of a hasber. Rabbi Yehuda Chassid over here in Daf Yudalef from the Beis, he explains. He says that when he asked this to Rabbeinu Tam, that's our Rebbe today, is Rabbeinu Tam. He says when he asked this to Rabbeinu Tam, he said he understood that other things don't get a bracha. Like you can understand that when it comes to tiyul or learning, so there it can be tafel. That he understands. But how could you say that sleeping, that for sure should require a bracha? So what's talking the pshat? Why does sleeping not get a bracha? But again, the etzem idea, we could sort of understand on learning and on hanging out, just like you understand that when it comes to matzah, I didn't need to eat matzah, so there's only a bracha on the first night. So too, you understand that I didn't need to learn in the sukkah, so maybe they weren't misaking a bracha. But sleeping is you're going to get stuck, Rabbi Say. So this, what you're going to have to say is that kanira, like a concept that we find in other places in halacha, that we're trying to figure out when Chazal were instituting the bracha, what was the ikar kfiyas of the person. We find in Chanukah sometimes the ikar kfiyas. We find in Erevin sometimes the ikar kfiyas of the person is where he eats. And Leil Shabbos, sometimes you have that shaila klape hadakas neiros. Your ikar kfiyas is where you eat. The Kanira Chazal wanted to, I don't know, maybe not to be misraba in the brachas. So it said that bracha that you make on the eating, that's where we're going to have, that shows your ikar kfiyas. And it's hagam, you're chayiv to sleep in a sukkah. Maybe this is where it came from, the minig ha'olam. They didn't understand this landus. You're chayiv to sleep in the sukkah. But the ikar kfiyas of the person is when he's eating. So if the ikar kfiyas of the person is when he eats, Chazal said, make a bracha on the ikar, and that's considered enough to pater all the other activities that go on. It's a very big chiddush. It works backwards, it works forwards, it works on sleeping. And thus is Vashteit in Tosfos. Thus is Vashteit in Tosfos. Most Rishonim, they bring this minig, the Rosh, the Torah, the Beis the Mordechai, they all bring this, and the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Tov Reish Lamed Tes certainly seems to support this. He says, Nagu she'ein Tov Reish Lamed Tes Yifches, Nagu she'ein mevarchin al HaSukkah, ela b'shas achila. The Maisa, the minig, is a very interesting way the Shulchan Aruch brings the halacha. Like, if you want to know my feeling of the Shulchan Aruch, he just spent an entire siman telling you eat in the sukkah and sleep in the sukkah and learn in the sukkah and everything you're supposed to do in the sukkah. And if it's raining, you don't go into the sukkah. At the end, as if to say, so anybody is going to think, therefore you make a bracha each and every time, as long as there was a HaSukkah das. That's how everybody would think. If you know the basic klalim and brachas, that's what you would think. And that comes along Shulchan Aruch and Tzifchetz and says, but you should know Nagu ein mevarchin al HaSukkah ela b'shas achila. The minig is nisht hazeh. Now, even though when you read the Shulchan Aruch and the whole concept daf chafet daf lamed, you're for sure going to think that you're supposed to make a bracha on anything you do in the sukkah, so long as it's a das. You should know the minig is not like that. The only time we make a bracha is b'shas achila. And then the Ramah ends with two very difficult words. Says the Ramah, v'halchi noeg. Shkoyach? What's the Ramah adding? It says, v'nagu, to only make a bracha, b'shas achila. Says the Ramah, v'halchi noeg. So the Ramah doesn't add unless he needs to add. What's he adding? He's adding, yeah, we also in Minig Ashkenaz, we're also noyig like that. Maybe, but then he should have said V'kein. He said V'kein anu noyigim or something. What's this lashon that he says V'hochi noyig? It's very difficult. Maybe we'll come back to it. HaShulchan already asked the Shiloh. But this Rabbi say, is the etzim alumdis? What's the reason why we paskin like this? Hooray. I mean, many Rishonim paskin not like this. The Rif, the Rambam, the Goinim, and like I told you, the HaRav, the Gra, they paskin. I guess the answer is very simple. It's a suffix. It's somewhat of a suffix brachas. The Rabbeinu Tam says not like that. Meaning the Rabbeinu Tam says the minig's not like that. And he says the iker's on the achila. So therefore, I guess we'll make the bracha on the iker and we're part of the tafel. But this Akdom Rabbi said, let me gain the bissel to verstanden and the shilas that come out. And I think now everything will be quite simple. Shilah number one, halacha l'maisa. God fellow goes into the sukkah on let's say he comes home after davening and he walks into his sukkah and he's going to sit and learn a little bit before breakfast. So what should he do? He woke up, he went to shul, he comes back. He clearly doesn't have the leishiv from the day before. He hasn't made a leishiv in many hours. And there's been ganz fine and everything. So what does he do? And it says every day you need a leishiv. So he walks into his sukkah and he's not having breakfast yet for another hour or something like that. And he sits down to learn. Does he make a leishiv? So you should know, Rabbi Zayed, the Vilna Goyim would say yes. And many Rishonim would say yes. And now you know that the answer is that l'chayra the halacha is no. And over here, the Mishnah Berurah is quick to warn. He quotes a Mogen Avram who quotes a Shla, and I'll read it to you in Siv Katan Mem Vav, Kosvu HaChrainim. And like I said, the Shartzian brings Mogen Avram, Chayodam, seems to be all the Achrainim before Yankiv. It's not an adaver. You're not getting involved in the Shiloh. And Lot says Gam the Poiskim that V'loi leishiv kach b'li bracha. Don't sit like that. Al-Kain, the second you come home from shul in the morning, then first right away eat something from the Chameshis Minim, eat a little bit, and then make a leishiv. And then, fakir, later on, you won't, when you have your breakfast or whatever you're going to have, your big meal, don't make another leishiv. Because once you've made one leishiv, that'll pat to you, Kozman, that you're there. But Al Kapanim, here's the first thing that we see, Rabbi said. We see that even the Mishnah Berurah is being misyaches to the Shita of the Goinim. And until today, you would have just said, what is this? I mean, we know that the minig is we make a bracha on the Achila. No, Rabbi say, most Rishonim will not like that. And even we agree that all the other items, all the other things that are done inside the sukkah, we agree also that they require a bracha. We just thought that the bracha on the ikar is going to pater the tafel. Okay, very nice. But it's certainly not lichatchila. Why should you get yourself into such a... I don't want to say maybe not lichatchila, but it's certainly preferred. No chanadafer. It's certainly preferred not to do this, to be saimich that which I'll make the bracha afterward is going to go backwards onto my tefillis of my learning. Why do that? Come inside, have a piece of cake. You're anyway sitting in there, make the leishiv, and after you make the leishiv, now you're going to sit here, and now the learning will have a leishiv with it in a much more muskam dikka way. This is what all the Rishonim, everyone agrees that you don't make a bracha on eating, learning, and hanging out. Avada, that for sure, if there's no HSukkah das, you'd make it on the eating, and then it would pater. So we have a problem that we can't make the bracha on the learning. And it's true that later on you're going to make a bracha on the eating. And it's true, we'll consider it as having gone back on everything, but certainly that's not pashut at all. There's many Rishonim that hold that you're making a mistake, and right now you're sitting in the sukkah without a leishiv. So therefore the Mishnah Berurah quotes the Mogen Avram, quotes the Shla, that you go in and eat. Now, God, it's interesting. The Shla, when he quotes it, he says, eat a little bit. The Mogen Avram, Siv Katan Yudzayin also. The Chayodam says, eat a kazayis. And the Mishnah Berurah, first, he's the one that adds the most. Eat a kabeya. Look, for Yontif, of mir gesucht. Was enough gemina. If they zoog into essence, this was brenzach. Why can't you eat a little bit? But what's a shakavataya? Because it's taka. A kebeya is mechayev. We'll see. Maybe at the end of this year, a kebeya is mechayev. A berchas leishav. A kazayis is not. So Kanira, the Mogen Avram and the Chayodam, they're saying that if you have even a kazayis, that's in fact that eating and hanging and this and that, you put that together and that makes a kviyas that everyone would agree. Shabur is nervous. Shabur says, no, have a kebeya and taka. That's what a lot of people do. They don't want to get into the shaila. They come into the sukkah. First thing, They make a bracha on a piece of cake, and the leishiv on the piece of cake, and then they'll learn afterward, and then later they'll have their breakfast or whatever. That's what you do with the Steipler and Rosh Zalman. They bring down that when a person comes on Shabbos to make a kiddush, they say, don't just sit, try to make the leishiv as soon as possible. And that's really, they're coming from here. Now, believe bracha. Okay, from when you come home from shul, you varech on the Chameshes Mina Dagan. Now, I must tell you, you could have been mechalek between Rosh Zalman and what it says here in the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah says, "Mikol malka mina kol ha'olam like the poskim shein mevarchim ela b'shas achila, v'afilim yoshim b'sukkah koydem achila shah ein mevarchim." The sfirle, the bracha mevarchim achakach is going to pater even backwards. V'poter es hashein ati alimad kulam tfeilim. You know, Rabbi Isai, when I read this Mishnah Berurah, I had a little bit of a suffix. Mishnah Berurah is saying, I had a little bit of a suffix. My suffix was, excuse me, I had a little bit of a suffix. My suffix was that the Mishnah Berurah says that when a person comes into his sukkah and he plans on learning for an hour, now I don't know if the Mishnah Berurah is bedafka. Mishnah Berurah is mashma that the fellow that we're talking about was going to learn for an hour, and then afterward he was going to have his meal. On that, the Mishnah Berurah says that's not the right thing. Have a piece of cake, and then afterward learn for the hour. That's a Mishnah Berurah. What if a person is coming in and in 5 minutes he's going to eat? Is there a difference? I'm not sure. You see from the Steipler and the Shlomo Zalman that they held there's no difference. You should rush up as fast as possible to make kiddush, so you shouldn't be sitting there without a bracha. That's a bit of a chiddush. That part's a little bit of a chiddush, because you could have heard that, once I'm about to eat, so then the learning I'm doing right now, that you can hear is much more toughful. But the truth is that I can hear not like that. And therefore, that's the first thing you need to know, is that the minig of Faina Erlich Yidin is to try to chap this shla and to eat first, make a leishiv, and pot to everything else. Next shayla. Let's say you're not b'chlal planning on eating. Now, how do you have a case of where you're not b'chlal planning on eating? So I'll tell you a very simple case. Because the fast on Yontif is going to be hard to find the case. But I'll tell you a very simple case of where you're not going to eat. You're going to be eating. But what if you're going to be eating foods that don't require leishiv? Like potatoes today, Rabbi say, you don't have to go far to explain this. Most people out there, if you bring out bread, they think it's Shabbos Yontif. And let's say you're a salad eating type of fellow, or you're somebody who's going to have just potatoes or rice or all these things they don't require leishiv. Okay, it could be that you are supposed to eat these things in the sukkah, because Rabbi Sternbach Lamashal, he has a tshuva in Shinayin Ches, where he declares that today, since it's become such a commonplace that people don't have bread, and that their entire meal could be just shahakals and adamas, etc. So maybe today that's the meal, and therefore the sukkah, it's considered a kfiyas and it requires a sukkah. Okay, it's a chiddush. But let's say, you're still like me, a meat eater from Flatbush, and bread and meat. You're a bread and meat type of fellow, especially on Yontif, and you're not holding by salads and all the time and dust. But one day comes and you're not having bread, you're just having salad that day. Or you're having rice that day, you're having potatoes that day, things that don't require the bracha of leishiv basukah. Truth is, rice is a shtickle shayla we should talk about, but let's say potatoes. You're having potatoes today, and you're having chicken today, and you're having meat, but no bread. So now, in this case, we might have a very serious problem, because the way that we explained is not the pshat that you're not making a bracha on the sleeping, and not that you're not making a bracha on the eating. It's that when I made a bracha before on my meal, or if I'm making a bracha afterward on my meal, so then it works forwards, it works backwards, and that's considered the ikr, and that's my ikr kfiyas, and they only were masakin a bracha on the ikr kfiyas. And then everything else is thoughtful to that. That's all very nice if you plan on having a meal. But let's say I don't plan on having a meal today. I plan on fasting the whole day. What's a modern day example of fasting? I plan on having salad the whole day. I plan on drinking coffee. I plan on not having anything that requires a leishiv. So now what? Say if you would have learned that, I don't know, maybe Chazal only were masakin on eating and nothing else So then you can say, I'm not eating, so nothing else. But we saw it's not the pshat in Rabbeinu Tam. The pshat in Rabbeinu Tam is that everything else is getting a bracha, because everything else is a mitzvah. It's just getting the bracha of the ikar. For example, let's say somebody wants to take a pill, right? And you take a pill, you take a little bit of water, you drink it down, you don't make a bracha. Okay. Because it doesn't have a taste or whatever. Okay, and the water is not being used for thirst or what. Let's say a person who doesn't have water, he has a pill and he has a cup of Coke. So he takes the pill with the Coke. So he says, wait, what's the ikar here? I only drinking this Coke because I want the pill. I'm not interested at all in the Coke. So maybe I don't make a bracha on the Coke. The answer is pashit. Of course you make a bracha on the Coke, because the only time you could say ikar is the pill is when there's a bracha on it. So then the bracha, the tafel always gets a bracha. So then the ikar part of the tafel. But let's say I'm taking a pill and I'm not making a bracha. So you can call it a tafel, but the tafel also needs a bracha. Moshe Feinstein explains that this. So too the Chazon Ish. Not the pshat that ikar of the tafel doesn't require bracha. The bracha of the ikar, gate of them, goes on the tafel. I say, besai, who are dim by us? It's not the pshat that the sleeping, that the hanging out, that the learning doesn't require bracha. It's that the bracha of the eating, that's the ikar, whatever, that's going to go on all the tafel. But what if I have a case of where I'm not eating today, or at least if I'm not eating something that requires a leishiv, so it should come out, that if you just this, I should have to make a berachas leishiv. And if you learned that this, I must tell you, Rabbi Say, I can't say you learned incorrect. The Chayadam in Siman Kuf Tezvav, Kuf Mem Zayin, Siv Tezvav brings Hamis Ana Besukkis. He's fasting on Sukkis. Neralidu Huadin Im Ein Bedaita Lechol Pas By Sayayin. Or if he doesn't plan on eating bread, and eating bread, cake, whatever, the things that require leishiv. The Kulei Alma, when he leaves the Yitzia Gemura, let's say he now had a Hesach, he's Chayev Levarech. The Davka Kasha eats pas, that's when these poskim hold you make a bracha on the ikar and you point to the tafel. But if you're not going to eat, so then it's not shaykh, and therefore you must make a bracha. Shakin Chiddush. And the Taz is mefurish like this. So to the Maimer Mordechai in Sivkot in Ches, they all seem to say that the only time we say is when you have the ikar patting the tafel. But if there's no ikar, then you can't say it's patting the tafel. Ramesh is a Zichron Lebracha Paskins like this. The Chazon Ish, the regarding Rishon Adamin, and none less than the Derech Chai and the Mishnah Berurah bring this Chai Adam Le'alocha. And it seems to be that if you would ask the Poskim, there's the Psak. I saw there Rabbi Yamin Zilber, somebody asked him this question. And he says, there's no safek. There's no safek. The Taz brings this, the Mishnah Berurah brings this. If you fast, you make a bracha on the yeshiva, right? If there's no ikar, then you make a bracha on the tafel. That's it. And it would seem very simple, which is it comes out a big chiddush. Now, before I go weiter, am I right to say that people don't do this? I'm just going to ask the oilum from a show of your little emogilach hands, right? I think that this is not the minig. I just told you this is the psak of the Chayodam, this is the psak of the Taz, this is the psak of the everyone, mamish everyone. Rav Moshe says it, the Chazon Ish says it, the Stipler, everyone. I think that this is not the minig. I think that people don't do this. I think maybe people will potter, and they'll make sure that if they know they're going into the sukkah, they're only having salad or whatever, they'll figure out a way to make sure they have cake or something like that. But if they know that they're going to be spending a whole entire day, I don't think it's the minig. So we have to come back to that. But it does seem to be the psak of the poskim. Now don't forget, if a person made a leishiv in the morning and he leaves and he comes back to learn or something like that, right? So then, the chayra, let's maybe I should ask as a shayla. What do you say in this case? Okay, I just told you a case where he's not planning on eating the whole day. What if he had breakfast in the morning? Okay, he had breakfast in the morning, and he ate, and then he left his sukkah. He made a bracha leishiv, and then he left his sukkah. And now he comes back to his sukkah an hour later, and he just sits there and learns. And he's going to learn for 3 hours. And then he's going to leave. But during that 3-hour period, he doesn't have a leishiv. Now, if you're listening closely, he does have a leishiv. Because we said, even though there's Hesach Hadas, but the leishiv in the morning goes on that. But here, the Chayadam takes the Chiddush we just said and he goes one step further. He says, V'nirali, hu adin, when he's Yatsa Yitzia Gemura after Achila, and he's Chayzev v'nechnas, and he's not going to eat until tonight. Again, what's the case? He ate at 11 o'clock, he made a leishif. He goes out for 3 hours. Then he comes back at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 in the afternoon, and he sits and learns until 5 o'clock at night, 6 o'clock at night, 7 o'clock, whatever. And then he leaves, he goes to Ma'ariv, and he goes out to Simchas B'Shvei, and then he comes back at night and he has dinner. In that case, says the Chayadam, that's the same idea. He says you can't say that your bracha is going to pater the tafel because there's no ikr. Now, this chiddush, it's brought in the Chayadam, and it's even brought in the Mishnah Berurah. But here, the Taz doesn't bring this part. This is the addition of the Chayadam. Here he called it V'nir Ali. This is the addition. And Abai Sai, the way we started from the Lashon of the Rishayim, the Rabbeinu Tam, and the Rosh, they were coming lafuke this. The Chayadam is arguing straight on the Rosh and Rabbeinu Tam. The Rosh and Rabbeinu Tam, remember we said, had two chedushim. One was that not every single tafel gets a bracha, and it gets pated with the bracha of the ikr. But the second chiddush is that even if there was a hezach hadas, they were only misakin the bracha on the ikr kfiyas, which is eating, and then it paters all of the tefillas actions, the hainu, everything else, even when there's a hezach hadas. And here, I think bevadai, this is not the minig, and it's very interesting. The Geraz in Sivkot in Yud Beis is mefurish, not like the Chayadam. And the HaShulchan seems to argue. Now, I know the Mishnah Berurah quotes the Chayadam, so in this case, certainly I would tell a person to get out of the Shaila. In other words, if you're going to come in the morning and have breakfast, cake, and everything, and then you're going to have the Hesach Hadas, and then you come back to the Sukkah to rest or something like that, or an easier case, let's say you're going to sleep at night. Let's say Stam, a regular case. A person's coming to the Sukkah and he's going to sleep at night after he came back from, I don't know, a Simchas Beis Sheifa. So now, according to the Mishnah Berurah, it would seem like, and the Chayadam, you would make a bracha on the sleeping, because now the Iker has been Mesir Das. You haven't had that meal since 7 hours ago, I don't know what. So then you don't have a tafel. In that case, the Chayadam says yes a bracha, Mishnah Berurah, and the Geraz says no bracha. And that's a simple pshat in the Rishayim. And therefore, in this case, and that's what I try to do before I go to sleep at night, I try to have a piece of cake, a kebei of a cake, make some form of a kvias, and then I make the bracha on leishav and pater. Thus is l'chayra. Now, l'maisa, now you would see what would happen in a case like this. Let's say a person, he said, he comes into the sukkah, he has a cup of coffee, he's not thinking, and he just says a leishav. He says leishav. Now, in this case, is that a bracha levatala? And it's very important if it's a bracha levatala. Okay, let him say Baruch Shem and go weiter. No, it's very important to know if it's a bracha levatala. Because if it's a bracha levatala, he also lost his shackle. Now, if you say shackle nimitavaro today and say Baruch Atah Hashem leishav basukah, of course it's a bracha levatala. You lost your shackle. You spoke after the shackle. So what about there? I accidentally made a shackle. I didn't accidentally make a shackle. I made a shackle and then I accidentally made a leishav. In this case, do we say that that was a mistake and therefore your shackle is now bracha levatala? You have to make another bracha. You know where you have this case? Everybody say Shmini Atzeres. Sometimes the person makes a mistake and he accidentally makes a leishav, which you're not supposed to. The Gemara says. So do we say now you lost the Bari Priyagofen because you spoke after the Bari Priyagofen? So this Abaisai is a big shaila. In that case, I would probably be makel because the Gemara just says not to make a leishav mitzvah the suffix. So maybe you could say it's okay. But what about in our case? Here we know that on drinking you don't make a bracha. Now I saw one sefer that he wants to say like this. He wants to say, yeah, but don't you see that according to all these Rishonim, that anytime you come into the sukkah, you make a leishav. Oh, so if anytime I come into the sukkah, I make a leishav. So then at least, even if we don't paskin like those Rishonim, but if a person accidentally had a drink, made a shackle, then a leishav, so I'll be simach on those Rishonim that would have required me to make a leishav. And therefore I saw somebody writes that in this case, it's not a bracha levatala and you're okay. But Rabbi Zai, I must tell you, I firmly disagree with such a statement. Why? The Rishonim Rabbi Zai didn't argue on the Gemara. The Gemara says, Rabbi Zai, that in Achilas Arai, And we'll see, it's not even Pasha. It could be an Achilus Arai, it's not even a mitzvah. It could be Achilus Arai, it's not even a mitzvah. And it would depend how he's doing it. If a person's coming into the sukkah, he's just taking a drink and leaving, because it's a milo to drink everything in the sukkah or something like that. So then it's not clear at all that such a thing is a mitzvah. It's not clear. It's not at all clear that he's getting a mitzvah by drinking. The Rishonim said that if you stay in the sukkah, in other words, drinking outside of a sukkah is something that's very normal, and it's not something that the sukkah is mechayev, because it's a normal thing to take a drink out. Mashenke Teshbegin, the Dura says the things that you normally do in your house, do in the sukkah. So for example, normally I learn in my house, I learn in the sukkah. Normally you hang out in your house, you want to schmooze in the sukkah, sleep in the sukkah. But drinking, I don't think at all that you would make a bracha, a leishev, even according to the Goyim. Now I'm asking, let's say a person is going in to hang out in the sukkah and he's also going to drink while he's there. So then the mechayev there is not the drinking, it's the being there. So I wouldn't even make the leishev after the shackle. I would probably make the leishev before the sitting and hanging out. But the drinking, stop taking a drink. Let's say a person goes into the sukkah and he takes a drink and then he walks right out. It's not pashut at all that he's getting a mitzvah, because the mitzvah Teishu King, the Duru says that do the things that you always do in your house, do them in the sukkah. That which you don't always do in your house, don't do in the sukkah. So it's time to take a drink for a second. It's not the type of thing. A person, if he's standing outside, he would have the drink. He wouldn't go into his house. The truth is, I'm not even sure about that, because maybe some people don't want to be oichel bashuk. So you can clarify that. But therefore, this case of Baitzai is not pasha to me. I'm very nervous this would be a safek bracha levatala, and it's a very big shayla. Rav Haigain, Hitaka says the next case, new case. Let's say a person goes on Yontif to visit his friend, and his friend is not offering him any food. Does he make a bracha on Sukkot Chaveira? The fee what we heard today, what should be? Kumtza game of Haigon, and he says there's a minig that even just visiting your friend is you still make a bracha. And this is the sheet of many, the Chayodam, the Mishabur and Shartzi and Sivkat and Sadi Gimel. What's the vart? And this talk is brought by the Chazanish and Rishon Zalman and Ramosha. They all bring it. What's the vart? The people we said it's very good. Till now we explained that what's the reason why we don't make a bracha stam on hanging out in the sukkah? Because the ikr in your sukkah is the eating, and therefore everything else is tough to that. But when I go to my friend's sukkah, the ikr is not the eating. The ikr is the bikor. It's just hanging out with my friends. So here, and I can even be moisif. Here, there's nothing that can be tuffle to it. It's if you're not going to eat there, it's not tuffle to an eating. Therefore, these great Goinim say you make a bracha just on merely going to a sukkah's chaveirah. Now, I must tell you about that again. I don't think this is the minig, and this goes back to what I spoke about before. Here, I finally found some siachsis. The HaShulchan, he writes over here a very interesting thing. He says that why is it that the Ramah, if you remember, we asked this question, why is it that the Ramah brings v'hachi noig, that the minig is you only make a bracha on eating, and the Ramah adds the word v'hachi noig. We know, if you're not arguing on the Shulchan Aruch, then you agree that's the minig. Our Shulchan says, no, the minig is always, you never make a bracha unless you eat. What's it coming to include? Even Sukkos Chaveirah. Even though over here, there would have been a very big svara that you should for sure make a bracha, because it's not tuffle to anything. It's the ikr. It is the ikr. Bishlam make you say, learning in my sukkah or hanging out in my sukkah is tuffle to the ikr kfiyas. The ikr kfiyas in my sukkah is eating. But in my friend's sukkah, the ikr kfiyas is visiting my friend. So where's it's not tuffle to anything. So you should make a bracha. No. So can hear a whole new lamdis. When they were misakin the bracha, they were misakin on an ikr type of a kfiyas, which is eating. So therefore, even when you go to your sukkah's chaveiro, you have to eat. And this, I don't know, maybe Rabbi is saying, maybe this Aruch HaShulchan is a remez that that's the minig ha'olam, that we don't make brachas on the sukkah unless we eat. It seems to be that is the minig, and therefore I always urge that a person should certainly try to pater. Maybe certainly try to pater. I guess you go to your friend, you tell him, look, I want cake. So regardless if you come to visit me, ask me for cake. Because
I have to wash. You have to give me challah. I have to wash.
No problem. No problem. If you want, I'll shech the chicken for you. No problem. Ducks are hard. I find them very difficult. Next, when a person makes a bracha, he makes a leishiv, and he has one suda, and then he has one suda, two sudas in a row. When do you have a case of two sudas in a row? Sure. You have Shabbos, let's say Shabbos is Erev Yontif. Not this year. But let's say Shabbos is Erev Yontif. So then you have to chab shalosh shudas. So you make a short hefzik or whatever. It's not really Esech Hadas. You're coming back in a minute. So then you do not make another leishiv in that case. In that case, even though the Taz says you do, but the Achreinim are vehemently opposed to this. Levush says it's a toyus, and you do not. And even certainly Rabbeinu Tam will agree you do not make another leishiv. However, what about this case? I made a leishiv, and I went to mincha. So if, says the Mishnah Berurah, you're in the middle of your meal, then no new leishiv when you come back. But says the Mishnah Berurah, let's say I eat, I make a leishiv, I bench, I finish my meal. Then I go to mincha, and then I come back and I have another meal, which a lot of times that's the case I described before with the Shal Shudas. Said the Mishnah Berurah, yes, a new leishiv. That's halicha plus a mincha in the middle, and you're not in the middle of a suda. You put that all together, and that's enough to require another leishiv. Says the Taz, what happens if I finished eating and I'm still in the sukkah and I forgot to make a leishiv? Very common case. People did you make a leishiv? A very common case. Says the Taz, here you make it now because the ikar is the chila. But if you did eat, right? But if you eat, at least you ate. So then we could say it's nimsheches. Maybe a tzaddik would have a little bit more to eat. Chot shepes. Now, the Shla and the Mishnah Berurah bring down, the Shla and the HaRav bring down that now that you know the lumdis, that the ikar is poiter the tafel, so they say you should have in zin that when you're making the bracha on the food of the leishiv, it should go on all the other things I'm going to do today, the hanging out, the tiyul, the everything, because that's the whole lumdis. In the short amount of time we have left, let's make a little bit of a sikum of which foods taka require leishiv once we're on the topic. So pas, of course, if you're having a kabeh of pas, that's of course. The Shulchan Aruch adds over here, I'll try to read it, one moment. The Shulchan Aruch adds over here, a cooked mezainis, excuse me, says oichlim b'shoisim, says the Shulchan Aruch, aval mutter lechol achilus harai chutz HaSukkah v'kam achilus harai kebeya mipas. Just one moment. Here, it depends on farfel or on lokshin or spaghetti or whatever. So it depends. Do you make on them a leishiv? So the Shulchan Aruch says, if you're kaveh suda, it requires a sukkah. So it seems to be if it's your meal, then you require a sukkah. Excuse me. And if you look at the Mishnah Berurah over here, he says, kaveya, ratzaloymar, oichlin b'chabura, or you eat a nice amount, it got into lunch, and then it's like bread. He says, but yosim yikabeya, excuse me, achein le'inyin, alein leishev, das achreinin, ein levarich, only when you have a suda. If you have mamish, pasta suda, then about you make a leishev. Then he says, da'oid, you should know. Many are machmir that basar, dogim, gvina, don't have it outside the sukkah. Don't have it outside the sukkah because your people are kaveh on it. Akapanim, that's number one. But let's say a person is having like a small amount. So Mishnah Berurah is a little bit nervous about having even a small amount of lakshin. He says once you have a kebeya, he says you can't make a leishiv, but don't eat it outside the sukkah. In other words, once I'm having a kebeya worth of mezainis, don't eat it outside the sukkah. But don't make a leishiv. Then the Mishnah Berurah talks about cake. Mishnah Berurah again, lakshin, only if it's a full suda gets a leishiv. If it's a kebeya, eat it in the sukkah, but no leishiv. What about cake? Cake is much more pas-like. Cake is already like pasa baba kisnin. So what's the din there? So here the Maimon Mordechai says, well, if you're having cake for breakfast, that's enough of a kfiyas, and therefore you should make a leishiv, right? I'll read you the lashon Mishabura brings. Because of my Mordechai, Mishabura Sivkot and Tazayin. Because of my Mordechai, Mishachal Pasab Abakis B'Shachris B'Tocha Cafe, like we do. Even though you don't make a moitzi, and Kevin Sheino Eichel Shir Derek Bnei Adam, Mikol Makam requires a sukkah. Sharei your kaveh your suda. The kachna hagner to make a leishiv. He says when you have a coffee and a cake in the morning, you make a leishiv.
84.
He says, and you know what? He's just telling you a common case. Or then without the coffee, but that's breakfast. But then he says, let's say it's not your breakfast, and in loikava suda love, let's say it's not your breakfast. Okay, you're not having a ganze breakfast. You're just having a kebay of cake. What's the din? He said, this is a world war. Mishabura says it's a world war. Zok the Mishabura. He says, look, you know what you got to do? Ayin the Sharchuva. The Gabe Shabbos, he tells you, okay, that for sure. Since you say Kiddush, so then fine. The Kuliyama, you can make a leishiv because that has a chashivas. He says, but b'chayil, it's a big suffix. He says, but the minig olam is yes. Zok the Mishabura, according to me, what you should do is you should stay in the sukkah a little bit. Have das that you're going to stay in the sukkah a little bit. Now, see what we learned today, this is Gvaldik. In other words, yeshiva lane, many Rishonim hold is chayiv. Cake lane, definitely there's a tzad to say it's chayiv once it's kebeya. Each one of them together, not push it. But when you put it together, azak cake and your remaining and das, so the melaf as azak and zugan al-hishav.
How does that work? How does that siruf work? If they're both suffix in each one, why does siruf work?
Okay, it's a very good shaila, and it's a good shaila that they say from Rav Shlomo Zalman that he said, therefore, you should make the leishiv before the cake. Because if you're making it after the cake, you're showing, you make cake and then leishiv, you're splitting between the cake and the eating. And it's not the cake that's being mechayiv the leishiv. It's really the mitzias of sitting there is mechayiv the leishiv. But that's not pashut. I don't think that's the minig olam. I think the minig olam is they eat the cake and then they make a leishiv and then they sit. So what do you have to say? I think what you have to say is that shows a little bit of a kfiyas. I think the Mishabura's lashon is like that. He says, "Lashevet zman ma v'yikaven the bircha and the achila val yeshiva she'achar zeh." I think what it does is it turns it a little bit more into a kfiyas. It turns that eating of the cake into a kfiyas. I know I'm saying a chiddush, but otherwise it's not miyashiv the minig olam, because the minig olam is they make the leishiv, and then afterward they make the leishiv after they make the mezainis, so that it should split between the cake and the eating. And if you see it doesn't, then it shows that Kanira, they're saying that the cake is the mechayiv. I know I'm saying a chiddush. It's not like Rosh Zalman. Another thing, Rabbi say, and this is what you do, Rabbi say. I mean, that's what you do. That's why when I go to sleep at night, I'll take a piece of cake, and it's fine. I'll take a piece of cake, I'll make a leishiv, and it goes on my sleeping, which is for sure a longer zeit. The Havdalah Shaila, the Grad, the Chayodam, they say you must make Havdalah in the sukkah. That's for sure, because that's what you do always. But what about the leishiv? You make a leishiv in the sukkah. So the Shevet Levi says that the minig is l'chayra. I think the minig is l'chayra not to, right? Meaning the minig is definitely to make the havdalah in the sukkah, but not to make a leishiv. Even though there's a kfiyas in the havdalah. So what you do is what I do. You take a piece of cake. After the havdalah, maybe you should cover it. And then afterward, take a piece of cake, make a leishiv, you sit a little bit, and that's it. Or you can make a malav malka if you want, but that's what you do. The Minchas Yitzchak in Kuf Samach Tes, in Chelik Tes, he talks about if, let's say, you were just, I'm sorry, he just points out, you were just at Shalashudas in the Sukkah. So if I was just at Shalashudas in the Sukkah, how is it that now, 20 minutes later after Ma'ariv, I'm going to make another leishiv? So we know the answer to that. because it's a whole new event, and you made a Berachas Hamazon, and the Alicha was a hefsek, and going to shul was a hefsek. So therefore, it does require technically a level leishiv. But the Havdalah, you can't make a leishiv. So what do? You make the leishiv on the cake, and the sitting afterward. I want to just be Messiah with one shaila that everybody say. I have a stira in the Bikur Yankiv, based on what we spoke last time. What happens? A person, he goes into a sukkah and he makes a leishiv, and then he looks up and he says, "Oh no, I forgot to take off the shlak." He realizes that he didn't take off the shlak. So now he rolls up the shlak. Does he have to make another leishiv? Everybody said, based on what we said last time, what would you say? I would say no new leishiv. Because we said last time, a Rabbeinu Tam, which is brought in Simon Tafresh Chavtes, I think it's Yivkat and Yutes, which is a Shita Rabbeinu Tam, and many types of all over Masech the Sukkah, that if you built the Sukkah B'Kashris, and then afterwards you put something on as a protection of the Sukkah, so then the halacha is that it doesn't passel the Sukkah. So over here, look, and Adkedekach, we said last time, therefore you should even sit in the Sukkah when there's a shlach. So in our case over here, how could you say that the Sukkah is passel? That's what I would have thought. And therefore I would have said that if you accidentally made a leishiv, roll up the shlak and go weiter. But I saw the Bikur Yankiv in Tafresh Lamites and Sivkot in Mamal if he says you need a new bracha. The problem is, Rabbi Yisai, is that, and I'll read you here.
What's the shaila now? I missed the shaila.
The shaila is like this.
The shlak was up. Yeah.
The shlak was up. Do you make another bracha now? I messed up. I made a bracha. I walked into the sukkah. The shlak was up. I made a bracha. Based on what we said last time, what would you say? You make a bracha or not? A new bracha. So I would say definitely not. We saw last time that the sheet of Taisus in many places, and Shulchan Aruch brings the Tafresh Chavtes, Le'alacha, Tafresh Chavtes, Sif Yutes, I think. That if you have a sukkah and it was made b'kashris, go and put on it a sadin, and it's still kosher. That's a bin adam. Aval im piris love sadin and nechama, whatever, shliyah love kismin and noitrin and all these things. So then it's kosher b'diavad. It's kosher. And therefore the Mishnah Berurah urges that you should sit in a sukkah like this. If it's raining, you should sit in a sukkah. So now, if that's the case, that I should even sit there when it's raining because it's being protected. So for sure, if I made a leishiv by mistake, I'm not saying everyone holds like this, but for sure, if you accidentally made a mistake, you made a leishiv, you're not going to go and say that you lost your bracha and that you should make another bracha because there's a tzad that you were actually yaitse. Right? The problem is that in Cain I have a stira.
The brachas lahakol, in other words.
The problem is that I have a stira in the Bikur Yankiv. The Bikur Yankiv in Tafresh Lamed Tes Yivkotim Mem Aleph says to make another bracha, and the same Bikur Yankiv holds at the end of Tafresh Chavtes that you're yaitse b'diavad, like we explained. So it's a stira. Is a steer.
We have the Bikur Yaakov and Lamed Tes. Which ice is it?
The Bikur Yaakov is in Sivkot Mem Aleph. The Tafresh Lamed Tes Sivkot Mem Aleph. And the other Bikur Yaakov is in the end of, I wrote here, Tafresh Chav Vav.
It's on page 103 in the book. The second one. We only have the second one. Ice Mem Aleph on page 103. If you want to put it up.
Meaning, the Mishnah Berurah in Sivkot and Memches brings down that if it's the first night, and he says, not the first night, it's time, you realize that you didn't take off the Latin, the roof. He says you have to make a leishiv again. That I understand. That's a roof. That's a roof. That I understand. What's the Lashon Bikur Yankiv? You have it there?
Which gives it on page 103. Yes, we have it. It's on Ice Lamed Aleph. You can move it down to page 103.
Ice Mem Aleph.
Mem Aleph, on the left side. Yeah, there it is.
What does he say? Let me hear what he said. Can't.
You have to center it, I think. I don't know if it's centered there. Mem Aleph. He brings a Taz, And he says, where it is? Where's the shlach? It's about 6 lines from the bottom, 8 lines, right? That's the piece. Latin.
I say, you know what? My steer is not a steer. I just realized he's talking that the roof is on. He's talking the roof is
the
on.
roof?
Yeah, I made a mistake. So it's not a steer. It's not a steer. He's talking the roof is on. He's talking the roof is on. Baruch Hashem. B'schus the Tziber. That's Miyushiv. The Rebbench will sein, Rabbi Say, mit der Ksive, Chsime Teuve, and a good Gebench to you. Parla is good, Bez Hashem. Bez Hashem. I'll see you guys next year. Whenever next year is, but I'll see you all next year. Ksive Chsime Teuve, Gmar Chsime Teuve, a good Gebench to you. And I'll invite Bez Hashem this year. We'll hopefully learn the halachas of Karbonis and Kodshim when the base of Mikdash will be Nivne B'mher B'yameinu Amen.
Amen. HaRav. Okay, everybody, thank you. We will have a HaRav tonight at 8 o'clock. As you just heard, we just stepped a bit into Leishab Besukah. A lot of open questions.